So back in the 60s, the early 60s, one of my wealthy friends, Chucky V, his dad bought him, I believe it was a 63 or 64 Chrysler Hemi Plymouth. And he used to ride us around in that car, and boy, that thing was very impressive. And when I got this bike in the 80s, actually the one before it, the 1000cc one too, it reminded me of that, I don't know what it was, just reminded me of the Chrysler Hemi. It was a lot of fun. And you can share this adventure with us in full 4K. Just adjust your device. Well, today it looks like the weatherman has blessed us with yet another nice day. We are just really having a great summer so far, and I hope it's going to continue on. It just seems like the weather's getting better and better as we get into the summer, but it's hot, and no matter how hot it is, I always wear my gear. Now, as I get the bike ready, and it doesn't matter what bike I'm going to ride on what day, the same thing goes through my head every day. Every time I take a bike out of the garage, I think, I've had this bike 44 years. 44 years. To me, that always blows my mind. And then I never know. Once I get out on the open road and I start daydreaming or whatever I do when I'm riding, I start thinking of things back in this, back in that, this trip to Lake George, this adventure we had, this ride to Pennsylvania, just everything. You never know what you're going to think of. But today, again, I started remembering Chucky V was very interested in drag racing and had a rich father. That's a combination, a good one. And when he showed up with that Hemi, the sound, just listening to it, he'd open the hood, two big 4-barrel carburetors, the big orange engine, man, everything about it, it's stuck in my mind. Now, it's hard to believe as we're living on a farm here and growing our own vegetables, a little bit of making some nice flowers, for fresh flowers every day. But those memories that are embedded in your head when you're a kid, they never leave you. And I don't know what there is about it. But this bike and the RD both, they bring back memories. I totally don't think about them until I hear the engine run. I feel the vibration in the bars. Look at the speedometer, the old school instruments. And all of a sudden, you travel back in time. It's amazing. I remember back in the 60s, the cars, to sell a car, it was all about the ET. Any high-performance car, what was your drag race time? What was the ET? Nobody cared about a lot of other stuff. You had to have that lower ET, and then everything else was okay with the car, and the Hemi was great. And in the early 80s, with motorcycles, this era of motorcycling, it was all about the ET, lower ETs, lower ETs. Look at the old car in the back. Look at this. How cool is that? And it was all about that. Drag racing was so popular. They had several magazines just devoted to drag racing. When you read a review of a motorcycle, the number one thing they focused on, what was the ET? What was the terminal speed? It was an epidemic of that time. And in my opinion, both the Chrysler Hemi and the Suzuki, this engine that came with this bike, so many people wanted that engine to make a dragster out or a drag bike. And the stock engine in this bike, and it is pretty much stock, is just brutal. The way it delivers the power, the torque. You can be in 2 gears too high. It is just a wonderful power band. And I think it's one of the things that Suzuki really got right all the way back in the 80s. And some of my friends, Joe Padula has one, and of course, the people that have them, they treasure them. They're willing to do anything to keep them just as pristine as possible. And everybody, my friend Dallas out in California has two of them. Well, I actually have two also. But just keeping it in pristine condition, keeping it running great. It's a driving bike. It's not a show bike. It's meant to get on a day like today when the weather is beautiful and just get out on the open road and dream any dream you like. And the memories I have of Chucky V's Hemi, wow. I just was so impressed, like any young person would be. And I was determined that somewhere in my life I'd have something similar. But it took me a long time to get up the money before I ever bought any car that was worth more than $50. And Barry at Westwood Suzuki, when he saw me coming through the door, he knew I had to have one of these. I took a demo ride, and I went home and sold everything I could so I could get one. And it was pretty pathetic as I look back. I had young man priorities back then. I had to have one of these at any price. And everybody I know that's passionate about motorcycles prefers different bikes. Some people prefer this bike or that bike, or older bikes, newer bikes, bikes that go way, way back. But this bike, more than any bike, this bike captures a time in my life when so many things were good. Gas was cheap. I had steady employment at the time. I had money to burn. It was just a wonderful time to be alive. And I had friends with Hemis. Now, it's funny how life plays out and your interests change over time. My interest in drag racing waned a little bit. Once I had this bike, I got very interested in making weekend trips to Lake George, among other things. There were so many things that were interesting back then to me. I was like a kid in a candy store. But there's certain things that you just never forget. And the day I picked up this bike brand new and drove down to Main Street in Westwood, I just thought I was the king of the world. It just gave me that feeling. And this bike came with a matching helmet. I wish I still had that helmet just to put on the shelf. That was a magic time of life, and I got to live every minute of it. And I remember Chucky V went on to become quite a drag race fanatic, and he made that the passion of his life, and I made motorcycling for me. Now, one of the things I always wonder about, my good friend Najat is rebuilding very old computers, trying to relive the time when the computers were new. I know a lot of people have different things that bring them back to their childhood, different sounds, different things, furniture in their house, or the way they dress or whatever, but for me, there's just something about older motorcycles, and this one in particular, and the memories they bring back. I don't know if you could have those memories if you sold a bike. Maybe you would, but for me, just getting on that saddle brings back every one of the good memories. And 44 years, and we're coming up on, I think we're over 79 now when you add the two speedometers together. All the years, all the miles, all the memories. What an investment this bike was when I bought it. And I feel so bad when people email me or send me a comment on the video that they had this bike or one similar, and for some reason they had to sell it or they just sold it, and they're really, really sorry they sold it. And one thing, I will never sell this bike. And no matter what bike you ride or how old you are, your memories will be different. Your recollection will be different. But once you sell a bike that becomes a classic, it's almost impossible to get it back. And over the years, I've been tempted to make this a hot rod, make it a cafe racer, because I have two of them. I've made evil twins out of them and repainted the one, and I've had so many different choices, but it's always the core of this bike that brings you back. That engine, the torque, the smooth power delivery. They're just effortless. You get out at 70, 80 miles an hour, open the throttle, and it just takes off like a rocket ship. There's just something about it. And the seat being so comfortable, the hours go by. And speaking of going by, we got to get back to the farm. Check out what Karen's doing. This has been a wonderful day. Every bike reminds me of something different, but boy, this bike does bring back those memories of the early 60s riding around in Chucky's Hemi. That was really, really a good memory. And when I got this bike, I thought, this is like the Chrysler Hemi of motorcycles. You know what? And it is. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit the like button if you did, and thank you so much for watching.